Welcome once again to Syntax Error, your pretentious, philosophical, pedantic podcast ostensibly about video gaming and related topics therein. Warning, this podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, welcome back to Syntax Error. I, of course, remain Scott Thurlow, as always, joined tonight by Jonathan Ian Manzer.
And I have a history of violence.
Indeed you do. And Stephen Amosi.
Hello.
And so if you caught up our episode before this, we sort of laid out FPS games and like the psychology, history of them. And a la that episode, Ian happened to have found an article that was sort of in line with what we were talking about that night. So tonight I found one called Boom Headshot by Martin Annander. Sorry if I'm pronouncing the name. Via Gamasutra, so I'll give them all credit where the credit is due. Mm-hmm. But it's basically about violence in games generally. And about the depiction of violence and how that's sort of like an ingrained aspect of games. Especially, like, not especially, but of course, mostly in FPS. And how, like, sort of like the difference between the experience of that and how violence actually, you know, is affecting people in real life. And how games are sort of the medium that embraces that in a sense, but perhaps maybe it can embrace it in a different and better way going forward.
So I just want to clarify the point here that generally when you talk about violence in video games, it falls into two camps, which I think that this article avoids. You have those that are attempting to make a political statement out of violence in video games, and those that are saying there's nothing wrong whatsoever and it's just a game.
Right.
And this kind of treads between those two camps and saying
exactly
that, like it's in a way a weird like kind of merging of games almost require it in a certain fashion. Not all games do, but like first person shooters certainly do. But like and it's kind of bounces between the two of like there are like concerns that need to be addressed, but not in the sense of the judgmental way that other like people who are railing against video game violence do.
Sure, so. Exactly. It doesn't take really one side or the other of either extreme, but like that's why I think it was a good one to explore, because it's something like we would do, like think about the middle ground and like, you know, where it lies and the philosophy and, again, psychology behind it all.
Yeah, what I kind of like about this is it doesn't talk about whether or not video games make people violent.
It makes no judgment. Mm-hmm.
Right? It talks about whether or not the violence in video games is portrayed in a way that actually makes you think about that violence and actually makes you...
is impactful in some way.
You know, go back and look at that violence and perhaps view it in a different way. And I think what it's saying is that most first-person shooters, at least, and most video games that have violence as part of them do not do that.
I think that its main concern is whether video games like kind of inure the players to the violence. And he actually established it, if you don't mind me treading on this, okay. He opens it up with the fact that the author's brother is loves like first-person shooters and like in a sense takes, I would say pride in them, but like that is a topic he would bring up in conversation, a hobby of his.
Right.
And he met someone who actually was faced with real life violence of that nature and war, and that kind of conflict between what we consider shooting someone in a video game versus having to shoot someone in real life. Yeah. And that's where he brings it up with the framework for the rest of this article.
Yeah, you're right. So it starts with the anecdote, which I thought was very interesting. I think it's a pretty powerful opening to the article where the author, Martin, says that his brother was talking to a mentor of his in whatever class he was doing, and they became sort of like kind of casual friends, and his brother brought up the fact that he enjoys video games, and at the time he was playing Halo 2, and sort of like was, again, I want to say bragging or proud is the point, or the word, but he said like, these games require you to basically kill the other team.
Right. With
guns in the FPS view. And his mentor was sort of silent for a bit and said, you know, I don't like that kind of stuff. and sort of like brought it out to him, like why he didn't like, because he indeed was involved in an actual war in a very like unfortunate circumstance. So it like he had the experience, and I think that the ending of the first section here in the article says his brother, there was no possible way his brother could share that memory, that experience. So therefore, it changes like the interpretation of it like is wildly different from an outsider's perspective, who and not only an outsider from the hobby of video games, but an outsider who indeed was involved in real actual like bloodshed.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is that he talks about how, even though he doesn't have these same experiences, he talks about how this kind of made this really big impression on his brother. Like, you know, he had never thought about it in this way before.
Exactly.
And I think that's a big point of what this article is about, is that like we don't actually think about video games in terms of killing people, right? Because they're just pixels on the screen or whatever, or you know, it's somebody else, but they can still talk shit to you after they're dead for the most part, like things like that.
Sure, real quickly, it's an video games are essentially an abstraction of violence, right? There's no real connection.
There's actually a quote that I think is very powerful, which is I think it's a paraphrase from the brother, but it's not about the violence. It's more like the score in a soccer match. You get points and you're better than the other guy.
Yeah,
and bringing that kind of mindset
that's
into
the abstraction
violence
of it.
But I think that highlights exactly what that abstraction is.
I agree. That's precisely true. So it goes on from that and sort of like mentions a couple of things. Like, for example, I have to throw this in. He says, like you said, he takes not really sides per se, but he tries to like sort of balance out both of them. And if I read a quote real quick for you guys, that even though it's not all about murder, we played first-person shooters for decades for reasons other than murder. For example, we played them to win prizes in esports events, which is valid, because we enjoyed a sense of mastery, like, you know, basically just problem-solving skills, or because we would constantly get engrossed in a compelling narrative, of course, which is Bioshock reference. But either way, I think that's all valid, but it's sort of like, again, as you guys said, the framework of this is to think about the real-life, like, the impact of simulated violence versus actual violence, and like what the disconnect is sort of between those two, as proposed to you by games.
Yeah,
so
I mean, I
comment upon that.
I completely agree with that. That's a really interesting way to look at it. And in the next section after the first, in the second section, he talks about kind of the way that it's viewed by people that are not into video games.
Right.
And he says
exactly.
maybe the most harmful effect in all of this is when someone observes our games from outside the hobby and the aggressive behaviors we express. All they typically see is the violence.
Exactly.
Right. So like it's this idea of like when you're actually playing the video game, you're not expressing violence, right? When you're playing a video game where you have to kill a bunch of people, the idea is that you're trying to master the
mechanics,
exactly,
more or less.
It's
we'll call it that.
It's the same thing as like trying to master, you know, foosball or something. It's just like getting good at a game, and this game happens to be about killing people,
murder,
right?
Yeah. No, it's a win condition.
Yeah,
exactly.
An argument over whether murdering a virtual person is a great win condition, if there are better ways, is an interesting argument. But I don't think that's. It's sort of like, again, he's not passing judgment over whether it's good or not.
It's just there.
It is a reality of video games.
Right.
Therein, exactly.
But he does later on go into, and we'll talk about this for sure, but he does later on go into games that aren't, that kind of subvert that idea of what a video game has to be like, right? So your standard first-person shooter is you just go and kill the most people or kill everything that's in your way.
Enemies at the core of it, sure.
And when you've done that, you've attained the win condition, as you say, Ian, and that's it. It's, you know, nobody that's playing these violent video games is thinking in terms of like, oh, how many people did I? They may be saying how many people did I kill today, but they're not actually thinking, oh, I've killed this many people. Obviously, they don't think that they are killing these people.
Sure.
They think that they are better than them at this game.
How many points have I accumulated?
Yeah, right.
It reduces like
it's a digitized
casualties
scoreboard.
to strictly numbers.
Right.
Exactly.
Which is perhaps problematic in and of itself.
Or
right?
it can be if you don't realize it at the outset.
I don't want to go off on a tangent here. But,
Okay, Dennis Miller.
But sure.
But there is a thing that I forget the exact quote, but it said that what's a greater tragedy, like 100 people you know dying, or
a million
people you don't know,
Sure.
and but bringing violence to just numbers, kind of, puts a barrier between realizing the repercussions
Of course,
of what.
like I said, it abstracts it, and like
It glosses over the actual violence that is being portrayed, whether or not it's real. Whether you realize that it's not real when you're killing something in Halo, but it does also say, "Hey, killing this thing is not bad. It's a point on your
sure, and
added to
in
your
fact,
score."
It's a positive thing in terms of
Right.
that.
And like, what does that? What does that do to
How
a
does it
person?
affect
Yeah,
people?
exactly. How does it like? There are many studies that say that video games do not cause violence, right? And that I can agree with. But do you become somewhat inured to seeing violence because of watching video games? Do you not care as much when you see somebody get killed on TV, or like if you could see somebody, if you see a video that came out of whatever war zone happens to be
Sure.
happening at the time? Does
Right.
that make it less impactful to you?
Well, I mean, like the thing is, like the right wing and the left wing has argued various points about either way,
right.
and there's been some studies done. So we're not going to delve into that because we don't have all the research in front of us. But certainly, that's something that still is being ongoing, researched because of the psychological effect, or not, like what the reach of it is.
But also,
what the
fuck Jack
extent of it
Thompson, right?
Yeah, well, Jack Thompson sure is a
Fuck that
separate
guy.
thing. Maybe we'll do a thing about him.
Well, there's a point I want to make on that larger later as we proceed in this.
As we
But
go on.
right now,
Okay.
I want to bring up a point that the Army actually put out a video game a while
Yes.
back, and the idea was it was argued that it was a subversive or not a propaganda piece in a way of training people to not give it, and the drone
to reduce their
programs-
empathy.
But the drone programs have also
Mhm.
been saying that you go
They're
to a 9
designed
to 5
like video
job,
games,
which
or
is video game style.
Yep,
So
Yeah,
it's,
that's very true, for sure.
it really is. Like that's an interesting point. Like I've listened to some interviews about people that control drones all day, and like a lot of times it's like, hey, we get put into a room for 12 hours and then, we just like fly fucking drones around and kill people. And it seems completely unreal. And then you have to reconcile, after you leave that environment, you have to reconcile that with like yourself as a human being. It's
Exactly.
apparently it's very, very hard on these people that like sit in these rooms, because they subject them to very long hours, but it's like going to a job to them, right?
And then they go home to their families
Yeah.
right after they're done
Precisely.
with it. So
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting to reflect upon perhaps the impact of that, which we can't really say in depth for sure. But I mean, that phenomenon exists, and it's
Right.
there, and it's prevalent, or at least not prevalent, but it exists in our society, and people are being, if not inured, exposed to it in a certain sense. And sure, it could be like used for nefarious ends, or if you run out to its logical extent, it could be that. So, like, yes, that's a very important point to keep in mind, although it's not like the focal point here, but
Right.
just keep that one aspect as well in mind. So we'll go on to the next part of the article, which is narrative conflict, I believe.
Mhm.
So he points out, like, I believe it's a good first line. The first quote is, other medium, like films, TV, etc., literature even, contains violence. So it's all the same, like, video games are no different.
Right.
Although, that is not quite true,
Yeah.
because all of us, as we discussed, like, we've touched upon this in various episodes, like, video games are an active medium versus passive
Right.
mediums.
Those are, yeah, exactly. And I think that's the big difference,
basically
right?
the main
Like you're
point of
watching
this.
somebody get killed. And the other thing is like other media, like movies, TV shows, literature, they have more of a space to reflect on.
Exactly.
And he talks about this as well, but like they have more of a space to reflect on what, that act of violence does to the person that's committing the violence. Whereas in a video game, you really don't. Most video games, and there are some exceptions,
and many of them.
but most video games, you don't actually reflect on what you have done to another person, that person is nothing to you for the most part.
Right. It's just a soccer score, as we sort of covered.
I don't know. Every single character I kill in a video game, I come up with a
backstory.
Backstory for them.
Well, that's you, but most gamers don't, and most games aren't even encouraging you to do that, which I think is one of the things that he brings up, like sort of like maybe a, if not like problem, like perhaps an issue to consider, like that. He uses, I think, the term shallow here and there. Like video games seem shallower in that sense because of that.
Because there's not as much room to reflect,
as you said, Steve,
on things.
Not as much space there to allow that. So sure. So then he goes on to like sort of like, I have a note here. It's almost like a Joseph Campbell style, like the 4 or 5 archetypes of stories. So person versus person, person versus nature, person against society, and a couple games that sort of encapsulate that. And which is it's a very well done section. And and I guess that's all I can say is that, like, as he says, and that I agree with, most games don't delve into it as much as other medium because of that.
There's interesting, I think we brought this up in our first person shooter discussion, but I thought this was a very interesting section over, in a sense, how upset we get over violence in video games.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because I feel that there is no one who will look at a zombie video game and say, I cannot believe the amount of violence
I sympathize
that's happening
with
there.
the zombies,
There are some people that will do that. But yes,
it's few and far between. We can agree.
Or then you have, he brings up Halo, which is you're fighting aliens that are not anthropomorphized, or they are the Covenant, I suppose.
Vaguely, kind of.
But still, there are not you killing humans.
Sure.
Then you have, like, even in Halo, like, matches, like, against other people, you're playing a soldier with a helmet on. And in a sense, it's
They
all...
might as well be robots, more or less.
Bland, faceless enemies. Then you have, like, you're fighting Nazis or other traditional accepted bad guys. But
exactly.
And it was interesting looking at where the real anger comes at, because generally in like World War II are not the video game that you see being railed against for violence.
Right.
What you do see is like Grand Theft Auto, where you can murder a prostitute after having sex with her and taking the money,
or just a random civilian off the street,
or something that seems more morally like crossing the line versus a World War II, which is clear cut. Which, as we said,
I actually want to quote a movie we reviewed recently, Grandma's Boy, where the grandmother goes, "Oh, drug dealers, well, they're bad people, so I have no problem murdering them in the video game."
No, well, I think
she said something similar to that.
She said, I don't like murdering people, but dopers, I don't know about, it's a funny joke, but it somehow encapsulates this.
Exactly, though, that the idea is that if we can say that these are bad people, they deserve to be murdered, then it's fine. Now, if they don't deserve to be murdered, if we feel some sort of empathy towards the person, then we start, like, then you see the, like Postal.
Or like hatred, more recently. Yeah, things like that, for sure.
Get railed against because you're not murdering people that society has deemed worthy of being murdered, which strikes me as very savage and tribalistic.
Well, super hypocritical to me, for sure. But all that, I think, is true. And so, like, I think that's a good segue to, I had a quote picked out. So, ellipsis. There is no 1984 or Fight Club in video games except by implication, or as interpretations of the most superficial aspects of the work. There is rarely any ambiguity. There's usually a bad guy, and you are the good guy. That's pretty much what you just kind of said. And
there's also there are these few games, few and far between, but you will see them where you are the bad guy, and you murder good guys, right?
You're usually an anti-hero.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, at best,
you're not playing a kamikaze fighter going into Pearl Harbor, like that,
which we agreed would be a ballsy move for any game to make.
Yes,
and also be railed against by probably both the left and the right for attempting that kind of thing.
Sure,
right.
You're right. I mean, I agree with that at least. And as the article goes on to point out, another quote I had picked out to sort of build on that point is that the problem is games are often shallower than this, and this can mean many of the medium. In many games, conflict and theme are the same, or one and the same, right? So you got Mankind's War against Covenant, as we just said, in Halo. Mankind's War against the Locust in Gears of War. Nathan Drake's War, I thought was a really funny line. Nathan Drake's War against the populations of Russia and Shangri-La in Uncharted. Like, yeah, it's sort of like vague racism, but either way, it's still valid, and Mankind's war against the Blight and Dragon Age was sort of an otherworldly monster, right? Mankind's World War II. Like, again, it goes back to that. It's like the be-all, end-all. Mankind's war, in the final sentences to close off this paragraph, Mankind's war against others for no other reason except that you have a gun in your hands. Like, that's basically what a lot of FPS does to you. And nobody thinks about it.
I think I brought up this point in FPS as well, with the fact is you don't see many Vietnam games because that was morally ambiguous.
Sure.
Right.
World War II, we've agreed that these people deserve
Nazis
to die.
are the enemy, and they all deserve to
even,
die, right? Like, that's the idea of those
exactly.
games.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like, he points it out, and, like, I still think, of course, like, it's valid, and he sort of delves into that a bit more. And the next section is called Presentation of Death, with which I thought was quite good. And he has a sort of another anecdote about John Cleese, which I believe we're all big fans of. Anyone knows John Cleese, where he says that what he found in comedy is that it's entirely about context, which is context of something we discussed variously throughout, right? But for example, a famous example is the Black Knight's expressions while shrugging off loss of limbs. If he was like crying out in pain or or just like vomiting or praying for like relief, that's not comedy anymore.
Right.
That's just realistic, like people getting maimed, like getting, brutally, fucked up, if you will, for lack of a better term. But because of that in the context, it becomes funny. So while games may not do the same thing, it still removes you in some sense because you don't see any repercussions. You basically see, for example, the old school games, enemies would just literally disappear when they got shot. They'd fall down and like they couldn't render. The memory was no longer there, so not rendering them. That character model is gone. There are no repercussions. And even in as generations moved on, still sure you saw like a bloody ragdoll fly across the screen or whatever. But then that was gone, or if it was just there, then it didn't matter. Like you didn't care. It was part of the background of the environment at that point.
I'm going to make a shout out to a game I really love, which is Valiant Hearts, which I think
we all love that
really
game.
Puts a spin on this, which no other game has. Which and they're trying to capture, in a sense, how World War I started off as everyone was for the war, and then it dragged on, and more people started dying, and people started getting really, really like broken by the war.
And it was a much more morally gray and complicated war.
This is one thing where all of a sudden you're just seeing the bodies littering the battlefields, which, from what I understand, was what you would see if you were in that.
Sure.
And all of a sudden it becomes real. It's kind of a fun game for the first half, and then it becomes very depressing, realistic.
You're no longer like enjoying it. Like if you are, like you're
see the repercussions of what you're doing.
The game is trying to at least force you to like think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like as a framework of like again, ostensibly fun puzzle game. But as the plot goes on, it gets darker, and you realize like the actual real repercussions of war, and especially World War One. So we mentioned that last episode as well, and we have to give the game a lot of credit. I think I still do. Because it tried to attempt to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't see that happen all that often, where a game tries to really dig into what made some horrible thing so horrible, right? Like, you don't really see that many World War I games because of that exact thing. Like, it wasn't a war that a lot of people really, really like were gung-ho about, at least as it dragged on towards the end. Like, World War II... the United States came into it fairly late, and like it was like this war against evil, basically.
Well, to elevate this conversation a little bit more, even, have any of you read For Whom the Bell Tolls?
I read parts of it.
I haven't read it. I've read other.
There's a very famous scene of basically a retreat and a march, like a forced march away from and like. The officers are being executed for abandoning their, and it's horrific and it's brilliant and it really captures. And that's what I think like inspired like Valiant Hearts. Again, World War I is the perfect example of Vietnam has the gray morality, but World War I has the perfect thing of people are dying for no reason, and this really captures
for
that.
Very less clear reasons. Exactly.
And so I just wanted to, I think that Valiant Hearts and For Whom the Bell Tolls, if you want to make a good comparison of how video games can be a work of art,
can indeed encapsulate that. Without glossing over, and with making a meaningful commentary upon that kind of stuff. Yeah, so then the next section is, this might be like, not my favorite, but I enjoyed the fact that he sort of lays out a bunch of games that try to turn that kind of thing on its head.
Right.
That did that. So I'll just go through games real quick. The first one he goes, explores is Thief, the Dark Project, which I played a bunch of it. I never owned it again, but one of the games that I happen to have played for someone else who owned it. And yeah, so Thief encourages you, in fact, non-conflict, essentially, right? You're not powerful. You're not like a war hero, essentially. It's Middle Age, it's sort of like fantasy Middle Age kind of thing, but it encourages you to work around the enemies, to not kill them. To, one of the early, like, Thief is a series known for, like, stealth. Probably one of the ones that, like, built the genre. But because of that means it flips the thing on its head. Like, yes, you have arrows, but arrows to, like, water arrows are, like, will douse flames. So you can, like,
right.
Create shadows that you can sneak by. In fact, conflict is, actively discouraged in that game. And so that's kind of one of the early ones that flips the conventions on its head, if you will. And then he goes through this game I really wanted to play. And I think Ian briefly talked about it on our opening episode this season, that Planescape Torment, Tides of Numenera is a successor. It's a classic RPG. It's like old school, like hardcore style, like party member stuff. But there are many instances in which you can either talk your way out of combat or convince the enemies to not fight you, or like make some other kind of deal with them to avoid combat. Even though it has a lot of the trappings of RPGs, it introduces that as a more viable option more often.
What's interesting to me is that I'm playing Torment Tides of Numenera or whatever it is now, and I don't know when I've avoided combat, because I'm generally pretty good about talking my way out of things, and that's how I generally play games anyway, with nonviolence. And so I don't I don't know when I could have.
How many contexts that would have devolved into it?
Through diplomacy. So
and I think that's kind of a pretty good depth, like a comment, ostensibly, I think they point out, like in Planescape, you can talk down the final boss, or there's no boss battle if you do it a certain way.
Yeah,
which really definitely turned convention on its head, especially back in the day. Like, I think Planescape came out in 98 or 99 or something like that. But either way, that's again another like sort of angle that was underexplored until that point, and then perhaps more things should take their cue from that.
Yeah.
And the next one is a game I did play, and it was Spec Ops: The Line, which is basically Heart of Darkness, the game, more or less, or Apocalypse Now, the game, however you want to take it. But it certainly channeled that. So, what I think is the best about it is that it's basically your standard, like, third-person military shooter. Like, you think it's, like, bog standard throughout most of it. And you're offered choices here and there. Like, for example, one where you have to disperse a crowd. So either you can, like, shoot somebody in the crowd, like shoot a random NPC in the crowd, or you can shoot your gun in the air and that will disperse the crowd.
Right.
There are various moments like that. And ostensibly, at the end of it, you're confronted with the horrors of war that you yourself, in fact, enacted throughout the game. So, like, it was a very good twist. So I apologize to anyone who's not played Spec Ops. It's kind of an old game at this point. If you didn't know about that, sorry, spoiler. But it did in fact, like, utilize that as a mechanic and to make a comment upon that. And I thought a very well done way, for sure. So, like, it turned, like, the modern military shooter, if you will, on its head and made you think about, like, and forced you to confront the consequences of being a soldier in a foreign war and what you're told to do versus what you're, allowed to do.
Yeah. And so, full disclosure, I haven't played any of these games, but I am going to jump in because he has, like, a description of all of these. Mm-hmm. And this game sounds really interesting to me because...
I'll let you borrow it.
Because it's, the idea is that it's this standard, your standard third-person shooter where you just... It even says in here, you empty clip after clip into enemy soldiers. But something that I think is really interesting, and it's something I think that more games should do, is that it says it makes you think about what you've done, like the people that you've killed. It makes you think about, the atrocities that you've committed. And, like, thinking more about that, I think, is what games should be able to do and can do. Like, at a very basic level,
sure.
if you can't do what a movie can do in terms of, like, getting you inside the head of the protagonist, if you can't do what a book can do in terms of that, what the very least you can do is to make you look at what your character has done, and perhaps, you're on rails and you can't do anything else, but it can be like, listen, these are heinous actions taken by your character, and you're playing through it, and because you're playing through it, you should at least have to a little bit get into the mindset of the character that you're playing.
That's the thing, like, you mentioned Rails, like, that's true and isn't true of Spec Ops, at least specifically. Like, some of the choices are on Rails, some of them aren't.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'll just read, like, the actual line. I'm sorry.
Go ahead with that, and then I'll...
Yeah, just the last line is, like, at least it's nonetheless effective as a reminder of what gameplay actually represents, in that sense.
Didn't Metal Gear Solid 3 do something similar to that? With
it did
you guys
a little bit.
Might remember
the more
that.
people you killed at one point, you get kind of punished in gameplay wise for like being haunted by their.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, Metal Gear has that series has always done interesting stuff with that. It kind of and what I really like about the Metal Gear series is it makes you think about the ways that you're going to go about completing a mission.
That's interesting. He didn't mention that series at all.
And
I think about it.
I mean, maybe he hasn't played it or whatever, but like going through that, you're like, there's always a way to get through any specific thing without killing anybody, right?
Yep.
However, or usually,
at least in
the main, in 4 or in 5, there definitely is. In the ones previous to that, I think whatever, it doesn't matter. Boss fights, you have to finish them, but like. You have to think, like, do I want to kill these people? Do I want to, like, try and sneak past them? Do I want to trank them? And, like, it gives you that, at least it gives you that option, right? It gives you the idea
right, you're not forced to just murder
you have
everyone as your only solution.
And perhaps if you choose to just murder everyone, maybe that says something about you,
No, that's a good point. And so the next one he goes on to is The Thing game, which I didn't even know. The Thing is one of my favorite movies. I'm not sure if I knew they made a game of it, and if I did, I didn't remember. Never played it.
No, I remember it, but I never played it.
Okay.
I think it was like a mess of like just bugs
it seemed
and
like
stuff.
it seemed like a slapped together thing. But the point of it is like because of the nature of it. If you know the nature of the thing, the story, or who goes there, I believe is the actual original story. So it's more like deciding like, oh, you come across an NPC, and maybe he doesn't trust you, so you do something that either convinces him to trust you more. Or not. I mean, again, it's your choice.
Right.
But then it has consequences throughout the game. And it's not just about shooting. It's about, like, while it's in first-person view and so forth, and there is shooting, like, parts to it, you also have to consider, like, the other characters or the other NPCs and their reactions. As Ian might say, like, the game developers are the gods of, like, what their ultimate, like, consequences are. But nevertheless, you're like, oh, should I sacrifice, even mechanically wise, should I give this guy a med pack?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he'll trust me, but now I've lost a resource. But maybe that will also come back and like pay off in the end. You don't really know. But at least the point of him bringing the game up at all is that it at least has those elements and those mechanics to force you to like do something else than straight up murder everyone as a solution to everything. So yeah. So given that we really played, I'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, sorry, I have nothing to say
Which
about
is one I
the thing.
did play, and one I very much like. I'm actually surprised that he mentioned this. Like, I wasn't expecting it to come up. It's Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth.
And he actually says like more about this than I think any of the other ones, to be honest. I think this is the longest.
I think he brings up Soma twice, but either way, Dark Corners of the Earth is one of my favorite games. I would love to see a remaster of it. Developers, do it.
Yeah.
It'd be great. But as I recall, and he mentions, so it's ostensibly an FPS again, but you don't get a gun till like maybe an hour into it, maybe more. It's a while before you get a gun at all, and a la Thief kind of style. It encourages you to like sneak around the shadows, like get around the guards. There's a an act between Act 1 opening Act 2 sequence where you indeed are now hunted by everybody.
Right.
It's based over like if nobody knows, check out our Shadows over Innsmouth episode. It's based on that story. So you're playing through that story, essentially. And then once you do get a gun, here's why I think it's one of the best games, and I think that more games should do this. There's zero HUD at all. You have a gun. You have no idea how many bullets you have. There's no reticule. There's no auto-aim. There's nothing. Like, you have to be like, okay, here's your gun. But you almost like, it's...
There's a count bullets,
again,
basically.
Yeah, it's not like, again, I don't want to use the phrase like, oh, it's as close as real life as it can be, but it's like, you have hindrances. Like, it's not easy to use guns in that game, even when it comes to using that.
Right.
You know, you're like, okay, I'm gonna shoot him with a revolver. Okay, now I missed him. Shit, man. Like, I have like maybe you have to think about it. Like the screen game's not telling you. And again, like, so as he says, it challenges FPS assumptions in its own way, which is something that to be praised, essentially.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. So, you know, again, it's
I gotta check that game out.
Yeah, it's cool that they've done that. And like, I remember playing, I was like, what? How they're not telling me how many bullets I have? But like, as applied to this article, I think that's, as he points out, I agree that that's a pretty cool thing to do.
Yeah.
It forces you to think more about it and forces you to like change up your, you know, your normal like ingrained instincts. Like, oh, I'm gonna shoot everything, every fucking Lovecraftian monster on screen. I'm gonna shoot him. Nope, sorry, you can't. I mean, I guess you could try, but they're gonna kill you before you kill them if you're trying it that way.
Fast.
Yeah. So next game is I actually did play one, sort of an indie one. I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago. The game is I'm Alive, and I thought it was an okay game at best. Sort of like the framework is your standard post-apocalyptic thing. Not zombies, but just like dust storms and like everything's all fucked up. Like nuclear like fallout is falling in and stuff. But the one mechanic is you have a gun. You might not have bullets, but you can come across like a group of survivors or a group of like, you know, other like renegades. Right. What are they in Fallout? Raiders, right? Yeah. So like they're like, oh, get off our territory. So like, but if they're armed with only like melee weapons, you can pull your gun up, and then it'll force them like they'll be like, okay, buddy, like, yo, all right, even if you have no bullets. So it might devolve into violence, but also you might diffuse the situation,
right,
with a firearm, yes, without actually firing a shot, without actually shooting your digital enemy. Yeah, which he points out is like quite interesting. He's like, you know, it didn't really like. That was a nice kind of neat little thing that they had. Didn't really change much, didn't mean much, but it was a good little like starting point for other games might use that. Like in the future, you might do something more with that.
Yeah, and I think I've seen that. I think I've seen that mechanic in a couple other games before as well.
I hadn't seen it before that, but
nothing that I can remember off the top of my head. But like I've never played this game, and I've seen that mechanic where you can point your gun at somebody, and they'll either, you know, stop what they're doing or become more enraged at you.
I played a game like that before. It wasn't I'm Alive, and I can't remember what it is either. So obviously it's not a mechanic that impresses much.
It's not unique to it, but like you've seen it, you know, here and there, like few and far between. But it's I think his point is like that's something interesting that you could explore as an alternative to just, you know, murder as your solution to everything. Yeah. So next one is a game I voted as my number 4 or 5 game 2 years ago, Soma. It's basically a not survival horror even, like it's somewhere between a survival horror and a walking sim. But I'll let the article speak for itself. It effectively sidesteps the need for combat and death by telling a compelling interactive story and inviting you to explore the atmosphere. So it's basically a walking sim. Like you can't fight, there's no weapons. It's an FPS view for sure. But you basically either have to like avoid or run away from all monsters / enemies in that game, and the rest of it is he says something funny too. Where is it? The interaction with the game is sparsely placed monsters, and fuck, I fucked up.
Like at some point he says, if anything, you could benefit from fewer monsters.
Yeah, exactly. Like, sorry, what's this out? Where's the quote I'm looking for?
It might have been in one of the previous mentions.
Yeah, it does talk about Soma before this as well.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. You're right. Fine. All right. My bad. He does mention it before elsewhere, so I missed the quote. But either way, the whole point is, in that game, the themes and philosophy of it are more important than shooting. There, in fact, are no shooting mechanics, and like the rest of it is busy work essentially. Like here it is. I got it. Happening. Uses menial busy work as filler during conversations between, like, you know, the main points of the game. Yeah. So even though again it's framed as such, they completely avoid combat. You cannot in fact kill anybody, but it's still imparting an impactful story. At least I thought it was impactful, and I think he agrees on that. So again, it's sort of like a vague evolution, right? As he breaks down, and the last one he goes on to talk about is Undertale, which I really, really want to play. However, please, someone who's listening, port it to consoles. It's supposed to be really, really great. It's basically a JRPG.
Are you done with that section? Because I kind of think that he misses a different genre of game.
Yeah, you wanted to comment about it?
That I think is perhaps even worse than first-person shooters.
Okay.
And that is the real-time strategy games.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are sending
en masse
hundreds of people to their death.
That's a good point.
That just disappear. Like, it's everything.
They're
that
units. They're units to you.
Yes, exactly. They're not even like they may like. And what's worse
just
is the
numbers.
Kind of RTS games where there's a unit, and as the unit gets damaged, they disappear. Have you ever played anything like that? So maybe you'll have 2 units eventually, where you start off with 4, and that is. I mean, you're just sending like you're playing.
You're a general sending your army
like
to their
a literal
death.
armchair general.
Yeah, with no concern. Like
armchair general.
Literally.
That's what
and it is the. I don't know. After reading this article, I now have a very negative opinion over what civilization is teaching our youth.
The game
enough.
Civilization?
Yes, and
both. Sure, I get what you meant, but like, I think that's valid and also funny to an extent. But sure, maybe like
it's not funny to the widows of those units that you
of the fire bats from
that's true of our fictional
Starcraft.
Victims.
Yeah,
I get it, but certainly I agree. Like he probably could have explored like other genres, but I think this focus on FPS in general, which is why we're doing it as a follow up. But sure, like you can certainly see the effect, if you will, like the implications in other genres and other games beyond that.
No, I absolutely agree. It's this has shaken my, especially after this conversation,
to your core.
I am now becoming an Australian game critic here.
All right, we're banning everything apparently. But no, so like basically he breaks down the couple games that we just said, and he has a quick summary. So like the thing is, that Sivo liked that we talked about offcast is that he points out during his playthrough of the first 3 Uncharted games, the kill count for his Nathan Drake was 2925, so 2,925 people. Versus 67 people killed through all 4 Indiana Jones films.
Right.
Like that's the total death count of all 4 films. But like, here's the quote that I'm gonna maybe leave off with, at least from the article. He says, "I think we need more games that explore what violence really means, what consequences it has, and the fact that we end up representing death loosely and easily as if it were eggs in an omelet."
Yeah.
It's a good quote.
And like, so as much as this article doesn't really give many answers, it does leave off with a couple interesting ideas.
It's not trying to answer anything, which I respect it for as well. Go ahead.
It leaves off with a couple interesting ideas for like what games could be.
Yes.
Like there's one point where he says like, maybe you have a game where you have to take therapy sessions after discharging your firearm. And if you fail, you don't get your gun back.
Call of Duty PTSD.
Yeah,
that should be the next one.
Yeah. Treyarch, make it. And Activision, do it.
Something that you guys have talked about before, a game where the ammo that you get at the beginning of the game is all the ammo that you get for the entire game.
Way back in the day, Ian and I were like spitballing a design of a game, and like you get this much ammo, and that's all you got through the whole game. So you have to
deal with the consequences of like what do you shoot? You know,
exactly. No, I mean I agree. So like as you said, like this article is not really like offering any answers per se, but I think I have to give it a lot of credit because it's forcing you to confront this question, which is probably like, again, as we sort of like said in last episode, most gamers may not think about it, or like it seems to me they probably wouldn't, but you should, because you know like there has implications beyond just wish and fun fulfillment.
And perhaps you should, just because you spend so much damn time on it if you're a gamer, right?
Yeah,
like you spend so much time killing people if you're if you're a Halo gamer or Call of Duty.
When I played Halo and COD back in the day, I thought nothing of murdering like my fellow like, player avatar.
But that is a depiction of literally killing someone, like killing another person. And what does that mean? Like, as far as what does it mean?
Yeah.
As far as, you're...
Exactly. And I'll leave off with this one quote, the last quote. Maybe it's as simple as sort of like paraphrase. Maybe it's as simple as asking why we kill, who we kill, rather than how, as we work on a new sales pitch or hobby prototype.
Right.
Maybe it's building ideas around implied violence rather than physical force.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps, the game industry might want to take a look at this. And I have no confidence that they will like change all that much. But maybe, as like more like younger indie devs come up and maybe thinking about this stuff as we are, perhaps you'll see more games that will subvert it or like use something different with it.
Less Call of Duty, more This War of Mine.
Yes.
Because you shouldn't have fun and do power fantasies. You should end up depressed. which is exactly what
Which is
all
what I
fun
play games
activities should end up as.
By the way, Ian just wants everyone to be depressed all the time. So I'm somewhere right in the middle, you know.
Well, I already am. I just like games that like sort of highlight that. And you're right. Like I think I meant to mention, if I didn't earlier, this War of Mine is probably a pretty good one. Even though it's not FPS, it does in fact address the realities of war in a very unforgiving way. And like, so it's not like a power fantasy in any way. But yeah, and I think this article, Martin also like points out that, or at least it seems to me is arguing for, we should, the industry as a whole, and even gamers themselves, should either make and or demand games that do indeed explore this concept further than it has been before, and stop being just shallow about it.
Yeah.
And that would be very interesting.
But when is that going to actually happen? Never.
I don't know.
So,
we'll make it happen, maybe. I don't want to say never, but sure, it's a slow and long road to
I'm
that.
certainly not going to make it happen.
But I would like to see things like it that do it, because, you know, the overall thing of just shooting people, like, there's no more to it.
I agree.
So I would like to see something that delves deeper into it. You can still have that. You can still have the shooting mechanics. Just comment upon it. Like, do something more with it.
Perhaps it's time for video games to evolve as an art form a little bit more than they
but
have.
there's still like movies that give the same effect.
Of course.
Sure.
So,
I mean, you go see John
of course,
Wick,
but
it'd be the same thing.
It's kill, die, repeat. Although that actually was an interesting introspective view of that.
that was a very interesting.
Yeah.
Sure.
But the title still is what people want out of games, and you know, if you enjoy murdering Nazis, like power to you.
Good on you, but maybe.
By the way, I believe it was Live, Die, Repeat.
Whatever.
I think.
I like Kill, Die, Repeat. That's a good title.
I forget what the hell it was called. That wasn't even the original name of the movie.
All right.
They rebranded it as that.
All right. But either way, all we're saying again is think about this stuff. Check out this article. We'll have a link to it, and the episode goes up.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, you know, again, if you're a fan of these kinds of games and this genre, perhaps think about why and what's happening in the game and what effect it may be having on you, or at least in people in general.
And tune into more episodes of tonight's show so we can ruin your favorite thing.
Yeah. We'll be ruining your favorite genre next time as well.
If FPS isn't your favorite genre, don't worry, we got you covered this season.
It won't be anymore. Well, I guess we'll end off on that.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. I've been Scott Thurlow here with Janie Manzer and Stephen Amosi.
Have a good night.
We'll see you next time.
Editing and engineering by Scott Thurlow. Music by Stephen Hermosi. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.